Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Goodbye Stars podcast. I'm your host. On my commute for your commute. Welcome back. We're on morning of game one of the Western Conference Finals between the Dallas Stars and the Edmonton Oilers. Dallas has home ice advantage, so they'll be at the AAC tonight at 7 p.m. Central Time, and a big game. Obviously a big tone setter. Dallas has finally broken the game one curse, so you can't really pencil this one in for a scheduled loss just yet. Um, of course, we got that one over the Winnipeg Jets at their home barn in game one, a close one, but this is going to be a whole different beast. There has been a lot of talk about whether or not we've this Edmonton team is better than Colorado, who we played in the first round. And giving it a lot of thought, obviously they have kind of similar team makeup where they got their, two guys, who are gonna carry that offensive brunt, and then a good team built around them. But I think Edmonton right now is in much better form than Colorado ever was in their series against us. So I think this is gonna be a great series. Hopefully, obviously it turns out a little bit differently than it did last year, because I think this is kind of the Stars year where they kind of have to take that next step. They don't. They should be taking that next step. Making 3 Western Conference Finals in a row is already hard in itself, and it's not like it's going to keep happening. I'd be surprised if they make it 4 or 5 years in a row here. But then also, if they lose this series, the doubt might start to creep in. Is this team capable of going all the way? Do they have the enough playoff performers outside of obviously Rantanen and Ottinger? And then is Peter DeBoer capable of taking a team to the Stanley Cup, and winning it? So that might start to creep in a little bit. So I think the sooner the better. You don't want to turn into the Buffalo Bills where, obviously they have Josh Allen, Sean McDermott, but just can't make it over the hump. But it's tough, because a big thing that we've kind of seen slowly change throughout not only the postseason, but even just the days leading up to the game one is the narrative kind of change between these two teams and how that looks. Edmonton once was kind of known as a 2-man army, or even 3-man army for some people, with McDavid, Draisaitl, and then Bouchard there on the back end. But and then on the other hand, Dallas was kind of known as the depth team. They had the 4 lines that could score. Johnston centering that third line, which was really, it still is pretty crazy. But that narrative has kind of flipped itself a little bit throughout these first 2 rounds. You have Rantanen, who's obviously a big game changer for the Stars, but he's really kind of taken on that the brunt of the production for Dallas. I think he had like a hand in some like 12 of 13 of their goals, stretching from those first 2 rounds. But outside of him and Onger and to a degree, Hintz has played well. Granlund has been all right, outside of his game 3 hat trick, game 3 hat trick, I believe. But the rest of the team has kind of looked, or I should say, the rest of the forward core has kind of looked lackluster. Duchesne hasn't scored. Robertson didn't score in his one series back, in his first series back. Sagan, I think, only has 1 goal. Johnston has been good, but obviously, and obviously has played with a lot of different people. But you would like to see a little bit more out of him as well. Um, and then obviously, Ben and Marshman have probably been a little bit more of a hindrance than not throughout the rounds, to varying degrees, obviously. But it's tough because um, now the narrative is kind of changing to this Dallas team is that one man army, the 1-2 man army with Rantanen and Ottinger and Hintz even. So it's real interesting to kind of see that switch um, very very quickly. As far as whether that's how it's going to play out, whether or not the Oilers' depth is going to continue to score at the level and pace that they are, and then whether or not Dallas's depth is going to be able to figure it out, it's tough to say. And I think we will find out very quickly within the first 2 or 3 games whether or not each side is going to kind of continue on that path, or if they're going to be able to, or if the narratives will switch back. I do have more faith that the Stars will be able to shut down the Oilers' middle bottom 6 lines, just because of how it looks like they're going to play them. At practice on I believe it was Monday, they were running the Finnish top line, and then for that second line they were running, which is a very interesting combination, and I think one that I probably prefer a little bit more than what they've been doing is they have Robertson, Duchesne, and then Johnston on that second line, with Johnston playing the wing, Duchesne staying in the middle. So a pretty interesting combination. Johnston has played that center position for basically I think his whole career in the NHL. But it's a very very much pushing your chips all into that top 6, skill wise at least. It is probably their best 6 forwards up top. And then they have, I think, that third line, I believe, is Marshman, Sagan, and then, oh my God, I'm blanking on the name. I think it's I don't know. They got someone on the third wing, whoever I'm forgetting. But then they have on that fourth line, I believe it was Ben, Back, and then Dadonov. So maybe it was Steele that was in that third line spot. I don't know. Something along those lines. But the real interesting part, obviously is that Robertson, Duchesne, Johnston line. I think if they can figure it out, obviously those are 2 of those 3 guys haven't scored yet, are kind of struggling to a degree. And then Johnston is kind of been a little bit more steady. But I like that line. I think it has the ability to produce at a high level and go toe-to-toe with the Oilers' second line of Draisaitl. I think it was Perry usually on that second line, and then Pods. So I think that'll be a good matchup line, and then obviously I think the Stars with those line combinations are taking more of the we're gonna really kind of lay the body, lay the hammer down in the bottom 6 role, compared to what they've kind of been typically doing as a team, which is we're gonna score on all 4 lines, or we can score with all 4 lines. They all kind of have their guy, and now we're kind of pushing that up to the top 6, which I think will be interesting. And whether or not that's how the lines play out through game 1, it's hard. It's obviously hard to tell. But regardless, these first 2 games are gonna be super important. Obviously home ice is a big thing, but probably even bigger advantage is the lack of Ekholm being in the lineup for the Oilers. A lot of people are assuming that he's going to be back for Game 3. Whether or not he will return that game, or if it's going to be more of a high scaling situation where he's only back for games 5 and 6 or 4, 5, and 6. It's obviously injuries are weird. They thought that he was going to be out for the season, and now he's rumored to be back in the conference finals. So that'll be interesting to see where he ends up, or if he ends up in the lineup. But he obviously adds a big punch, a big body to that blue line that's already been very, very good for Edmonton throughout the first 2 rounds, which is kind of scary because it was kind of typically known as one of their bigger weaknesses. And then obviously, Stuart Skinner is going to be a big Skinner and Oettinger even are going to be very big topics throughout this series. Is Oettinger going to be able to outperform Skinner? Obviously, last year he wasn't able to, and he kind of had his moments where Skinner looked like the better goalie. I think Oettinger will be able to use that as fuel, hopefully, kind of play with a chip on his shoulder. But then also it really depends on kind of like the Winnipeg series. Are we going to get what Skinner are we going to get? What Hellebuyck are we going to get? Are we going to get the Skinner that plays like he did the first 2 games of the Kings series? Or are we going to get the Skinner who had 2 straight shutouts against the Golden Knights to finish them off in 5 games? Or are we going to get the Skinner that comes 10 feet out of his crease on a last-second play that, Draisaitl will probably get the brunt of the blame for, but, if Skinner doesn't come out of his crease that far, that game's probably over, and they probably sweep Vegas, but it kind of depends, Obviously, pucks on net is going to be big, just pucks on net, putting Skinner in those high danger, high pressure situations, sooner rather than later. I know that's not really the Stars' forte, especially kind of recently. But I think it really is just going to be a big momentum game, big momentum series. Play well during the highs and mitigate the lows, and hopefully things will work itself out. But I'm excited. I think we have a good chance this Game 1 here. I think with Heiskanen getting healthier, Robertson is probably pretty close to 100%. Things are looking good. I think just the biggest thing is going to be getting some of these guys going for the Stars, getting Duchesne going, getting Robertson going. Sagan has had a lot of chances. If you can just bury a couple of those, and then obviously the defense playing as it has been for the majority of this postseason. According to what they were saying during the Monday practice, it looked like it was going to be Petrovic who comes out if they do 12 forward 60 with Lyubushkin slotting into that third pairing. I know Petrovic didn't have the best games 5 or 6, but it just feels really tough to make that decision to take Bichsel out of his kind of comfort pairing guy. Obviously he's an adult, he's a big boy, he's going to be able to figure it out, but just kind of that peace of mind maybe isn't there. But this is the end of the Goodbye Stars podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed, and hope you have a good rest of your commute. And yeah, see you.